A wonderful welcome to this Ask the Pros episode. We're just giving a minute or so to people to join. We can see, as Highland just also said, there's people from across the world, which is fantastic to see. While we're waiting, I would love to introduce to you, as you've probably, if you've been part of these Ask the Pro series already, seen already the Coffee Technicians program. And if you're interested in developing your skills as a coffee technician, this is the go-to program in the specialty coffee scene. You should definitely check it out. And it's a education program for new and experienced technicians alike. There are 3 levels available. They are foundation, intermediate, and professional. And that is across 6 different modules, which are coffee machines, hydraulics, electrical, water, preventative maintenance, operations management, and coffee preparation. And if you want to find out more about the Coffee Technician program, go to sca.coffee/coffeetech. That's sca.coffee/coffeetech. With no further ado, I'm handing over the digital microphone to Highland. Caleb.
Nope, Caleb.
Caleb.
Hello. Thanks, Richard. Today we're kicking off Ask the Pro, Roasters Basic 101. Highland, if you'll go for it, I can't remember the whole. Yeah, thank you. This is our 3rd season, and this is our final episode of the 3rd season. So keep an eye out on social media. We'll be announcing when our 4th season is coming up. And as a disclaimer, this presentation is for informational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in this webcast are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any aspect of the Specialty Coffee Association or the companies the panelists may represent.
Take a breath, Caleb.
Still need more punctuation. So as we like to do to kick off these episodes is a short introduction and what's your favorite coffee or the coffee you're drinking this morning, whichever you prefer. So I'll get started. My name's Caleb Leach, and I'm currently equipment service manager with Starbucks. I've been working in the specialty coffee industry since around '95. I've worked as a coffee roaster, equipment technician, service manager, and I have owned a cafe with some friends throughout that time as well. Today, in the spirit of this episode, I took my DIY roaster here that I was showing everybody earlier, and I roasted up some. I roasted up some Ethiopian Timor. I did a green blend, and so that's what I'm having this morning. It's a little. I'm still getting a little toothpaste taste, but that's my fault, not the coffee's. Ultimately, it's got a nice medium body. I'm getting some maple syrup, but I'm going to have to taste it some more to give it any more definition. So now I'm just going to kind of go through and everybody can do a short introduction. I'm going to go ahead and start with our special guest here. Doug, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Doug Graf. My wife Holly and I own Vintage Coffee. We work on roasters, pretty much everything to do with roasters, from consulting for plant setup, plant operations. We do rebuilds, we do maintenance. We travel all over Canada and the US fixing roasters. We've been roasting since 1986. My family has owned a variety of coffee companies up here in Vancouver, Canada. My wife and I, Holly, owned a couple of coffee companies. We've been doing what we do now full time since we sold our last company in 2007. I work with pretty much every brand, every type of roaster out there. I have some relationships with some manufacturers, Loring specifically, but we work on everything. Hopefully everybody's doing their maintenance so they won't need us. It's kind of a Maytag repairman thing. But that said, there is a huge number of roasters, new and old, out there, and everybody's equipment needs to be taken care of, thankfully.
That's right.
For coffee, what have I got? I've got a green blend, actually, that I roasted myself last week. Very traditional Northern Italian style espresso sort of roast, just a tiny bit in a second crack, 4 different coffees, green blended and roasted together.
Nice. Thanks, Doug. Arno, let's hear from you next.
Hi, my name is Arno Holchu. I think I have a pretty similar trajectory to some people here. I started roasting coffee in like 1996 on a home brewed fluid bed roaster that was made out of a heater blower from GMC Suburban and a heating element from a General Electric stove. And I didn't build it. I would not have been competent to, but I roasted coffee about like you think it would. I've bounced around in the industry, kind of same thing. I've done a lot of different things. Roasted coffee. I've bought green. I've been an equipment technician. I spent quite a long time now in management, and I'm currently the chief coffee officer at Bellwether Coffee. We manufacture an electric ventless recirculating roaster, and so in that sense, I too had a cup of coffee from my DIY roaster, except mine was 1,200 pounds. And what I had was a cup of the Magia del Campo. We are sourcing from the Asopep Cooperative in Tolima, Colombia. We also source and sell green coffee at Bellwether. It's a lot of what I do. And that coffee, just to make a plug for it, is our first certified verified living income coffee, where we did the work to figure out what the farmers needed to be making and pay them that price. So, and it's really delicious.
Thanks, Arno. Marty?
Hey guys. Yeah, like you said, I'm Marty Rowe out of Kansas City. I got in the coffee industry in the late 90s, introduced by one of the local roasters. I was born with a crescent wrench in my hand, so it didn't take long at all for me to want to wrench on whatever piece of equipment these roasters around here had, from the espresso machines to the roasters. I don't tout myself as a roaster repair person, but I've got a lifelong experience of power transmission, the mechanics that really make these roasters go, whether it's the thermodynamics of the heating system or the mechanics of the motor, chains and the belts and stuff like that. A chain is a chain is a chain, regardless of whether it's on a roaster or whether it's on some kind of conveyor system. And so I cut my teeth early on that kind of stuff. So I really like working on those things, but there's our focus really has been on espresso equipment. But I wanted to mention, my roaster experience, basically because why I'm here today. I don't know, I've installed roasters, repaired roasters. Usually when I get called in, and Doug, you can attest to this, the majority of your roasters out there are maintained, and this is kind of the reason for today's show, by the people that own it. They're the first line of defense in keeping their own equipment running. I usually get called in when that fails, when all fails, and or the manufacturer might be too costly to bring them into repair. They go, there's got to be somebody cheaper. Well, maybe I am cheaper. I don't know. But I usually get in when someone else has thrown the towel in. So it's fun. My coffee of today. Oh, I did want to mention I do own Workbench Coffee Labs. We're a training facility, and we're relaunching now that we've gone through the majority of COVID. And we feel a little bit safer, a training facility for the guys who want to turn wrenches on, guys and gals who want to turn wrenches on coffee equipment. So look at our website. There's information there. My coffee du jour is a local roaster. They roast on a Diedrich Parkville coffee, is tiny little cafe roaster. Guatemala that is, I gotta say, it is the quintessential definition of if Webster's had a taste portion of their books, this would be a textbook Guatemala. It's got some nice complexity of earthy flavors there.
Thanks, Marty. And I can totally I agree with that. That's usually generally when I have been asked to work on roasters is when everything else.
Can we put the fire out first?
Oh, so hi everyone. I'm Kirk Benedict, owner of Last Man out in Colorado. So I do service and sales, mainly service. But so today I'm here talking because I do a lot of work on roasters for guys out here, both the electric and the gas. I do a lot more of the electric actually. Arno's shaking his head. Yeah, I do quite
Kurt's
a
a
bit.
partner for sure.
And as I think it was Marty just said, yeah, I'm normally coming out after everyone else has given up and they don't want to hire the manufacturers to come out. And that's always a fun one to come out and deal with, guys. It's always the one thing I always say, you know, if you don't know what you're doing, just call the right person. Just don't YouTube it. Call the right person, please.
What coffee you drinking, Kurt?
Oh, took my Guatemalan I had last week and made a nice cold brew out of it. That was weird looking. So
Is that a Holly hobby cup?
it's just a plastic cup. Leave me alone.
All right. Thanks, Kurt. And as always, save the best for last. Island?
Wow. My name is Island Joseph. I am service manager for Espresso Partners. I've been in coffee since 1984. My roasting experience, I've done a lot of technical experience working for companies as a consultant, developing technical protocols and training manuals. My only experience actually working with a roaster was I did attempt to do the popcorn roasting thing about 10 years back and promptly melted a popcorn roaster onto my stainless steel table and had to put a fire out. And, I mean, and granted, I was a little upset I didn't get any coffee, but that pretty much is the extent of my roasting experience. You know, it's the roasted. What I find with roasters is it's what you guys are saying. It's like the owner doesn't call until the thing's on fire. So, and one of the reasons we asked Doug, Marty, and Arno here is because this is something that needs to be addressed in our industry, because it is practical knowledge and text you need to understand how a roaster works and actually what types of roasters are out there. So I'll hand it back to you, Caleb.
All right. What coffee are you drinking this morning? Did you tell me
Oh
already?
God, I'm not. Remember I told you my brewer's
Oh, yeah.
down. So
That's right.
I have two favorite coffees.
The guy
One,
that runs the national chain of coffee technicians has a coffee brewer that's not working.
wait, and I've got about 40 espresso machines that I can't actually access. I have two favorite coffees. Sumatra Mandheling Puani Estate is hands down my favorite. And I hate to give Arno a plug here, but years ago I used to do some consulting for Arno and Bellwether, and his master roaster Greg gave me a Guatemala Huehue Tenango that still echoes in my mind. And you know, the Guatemala, the Huehue Tenango really comes out really lovely, but they did a fantastic job with it on their roaster, and I still remember the flavors, the creaminess, the fruitiness, and it was just an amazing cup of coffee.
We still carry that coffee, and you
Arnold's my
just earned
friend, but
yourself a bag, man. That's great. Thank you.
So Arnold's my
All right,
friend, so
well-
I don't actually have to kiss his butt, but I was thinking about our favorite coffee. So back to you now, Caleb.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Now that we've got that out of the way, Doug, I want to go ahead and kick it over to you to walk through the presentation.
Caleb, one more thing.
Yeah, what's up?
Keep in mind, group, that we do understand Doug has got a lot of ground to cover, so we most likely will be going over 9 o'clock time limit, just to give you a heads up in advance. Back to you,
Oh,
Doug.
yeah. Thanks for that. All right, Doug, take it away.
Okay, so the first thing I just want to reiterate here, as you guys said, is these are my opinions. This is based on my experience, and really it's not manufacturers talking, it's nothing like that. This really is my experience. And I think part of why this is important and a great thing to do is just that there is so much misinformation and so much pseudoscience and so much kind of science adjacent stuff with coffee roasters out there. even if a technician can develop the basic vocabulary to be able to have a conversation with a gas fitter, with an electrician, with an appropriate person to come in after them, you'll be well ahead of the game. I think in a lot of situations, and even for myself as someone who does it full time all day, every day, really a big part of it is knowing when to pull back, when to stop, and when to call in someone with more knowledge about specifically what we're working on. And when I'm done here with you guys today, I'm going to work on a machine that we may be calling in a machinist and a gas fitter this afternoon. It's a very nasty one. So I think if nothing else, you know, just to develop a bit of vocabulary, to develop a little bit of understanding of how the machines work and what you're looking at, as opposed to, as Kurt said, YouTubing it and going out and grabbing a bunch of useless information that doesn't really have any context, is a huge benefit. So let's, oh, you can see me jammed inside the front of a roaster there. Yeah, nice. So the two most common types of roasters that we have in North America are drum style roasters and fluid bed style roasters. They are by far the most common. Other parts of the world, there are a few more machines that you'll see, but really what we see here are these two types. Okay, and slide, please. So the fluid bed is typically these days is dominated by civets and bellwether. There are a couple of other people kind of nibbling a little bit right now. Alio is coming out with a bigger machine, a 2-kilo machine, apparently this fall. There is a new type of roaster on the market that I haven't seen that much about yet called the Typhoon, that apparently has the ability to adjust between drum and fluid bed and actually utilize different aspects of it. The fluid bed actually refers to how the coffee is moved around within the drum. It's actually thrown around in the drum on a fluidized bed of hot air, which just basically means effectively a strip that blows air up through the system and agitates the coffee in the air, as opposed to obviously a drum style roaster that moves the coffee around in a drum. One of the advantages of a fluid bed roaster is that the heat transfer is almost entirely convection heat. So you're getting almost no conduction heat, with conduction being effectively frying pan heat. It is in theory a much better way to roast coffee. Most drum style roasters have a balance between conduction and convection. Fluid bed roasters are, as I say, virtually 100% convection. They are generally on-off modulation on the burner. The burner is either 100% or 0. You typically are shooting for an end temperature as opposed to a profile or trying to follow a curve to get your roast to come out correctly. They're mechanically very simple. There are not very many moving parts. It's typically a box with a burner and a fan. Very simple. And they're very much less common than drum style roasters. Civets, as Arno I'm sure can attest, bellwether is definitely coming out with some very interesting technology, doing some very interesting stuff. Civets is though the dominant player for fluid bed roasters. Okay, slide please. These are just a couple of pictures of, this is a Civets half bag roaster that I took out up in Alaska. So obviously when you see a picture of a drum roaster, you can see the roasting chamber is has the angled sort of side on it. As the coffee goes up, it runs back down the side into the path of the air. The exhaust goes out the top. On the right hand side, on my right hand side there, that's a green loader on top of the machine. Cooling tray in front is a very standard look like we'd see on almost any roaster. It is not as romantic as a drum style roaster, but they do an effective job of roasting coffee 100%. And slide please. Bellwether is a much, I mean, to begin with, they're a very attractive roaster. They look great. 3 kilo, I believe, is the standard size for bellwether. iPad type control, a little touchscreen, HMI. They do a great job. Runs a program profile that it follows, but fantastic little machine. They do a great job for what they're doing. A slide, please. Drum style roasters are by far the most common on the market. And it is what most people would recognize if you ask them what a coffee roaster looks like. North America, we typically see most common brands as Probats, Lorings, Diedrichs, Mill City, San Franciscan, Gießen. There are a few other brands out there, but those are definitely the machines we see the most often. The green coffee is rotated in a drum. It is physically agitated, much like a dryer on a clothes dryer. Loring has a cylinder with rotating paddles. Almost everybody else has an actual physical rotating drum. They are typically a mix of conduction and convection heat. Most of the time, the numbers you see out there vary a little bit, but typically most people are sort of shooting for between 70 and 80% convection and 20 to 30% conduction. So literally conduction being the coffee sitting on the metal of the roaster versus being tossed around in the air. And if you imagine it as the coffee rotates within the drum, it's not sitting on the outside of the drum as it spins around. The coffee will typically go up and then kind of drop back down to the bottom and up and drop back down. And that point where it drops back down varies a little bit with the design of the paddles, but it actually leads to, as I say, 20, 30% just straight contact heat. Again, there's a little bit of variation with that. If you have drum speed control, that's a much more advanced sort of topic. Drum speed control is very complicated. But they try to keep, most drum style manufacturers try to keep that balance towards convection heat. Most drum style roasters have a variety of gas controls. You'll typically see most of them with a fully modulating burner, meaning you can adjust that burner between 0% and 100%. With every burner, you have what's called a turn down ratio, which is the technical term for when you're running your barbecue, and the barbecue says 0 to 10, but really it's 4 to 7 for actual control. So that turn down ratio, how wide a range of practical control you have, is a measure of quality and usefulness of a burner. And most roasters, especially smaller ones, don't have a great turn down ratio, but they at least have variability in the roaster, in that gas control. And they're typically much more mechanically complex. Maintenance is much more of an issue. It's much preventative maintenance, daily, weekly, monthly, is much more important than it is with most fluid bed type roasters. If you're not doing that daily, weekly, monthly, things go downhill surprisingly quickly. The slide, please. So these are two kind of ends of the spectrum, if you will, on the drum roaster. It's a Probat P12 and 15 kilo Loring. So Loring is a little bit different in what they're doing, but it is still very much designed as a traditional drum style roaster. The Probat is pretty much the epitome of what we would consider a standard coffee roaster. They both do a fantastic job roasting coffee. Next slide, please. So roasters, like everything out there, are really broken down into some fairly basic systems. When they all start working together, it starts to get complicated. But really, most roasters, be they fluid bed or drum style, have three main systems. They've got the airflow. Now that airflow, both for the drum for heat transfer, for cooling the coffee in the cooling tray. The airflow is also obviously removing all of the exhaust, all of the products of combustion from the burner, the chaff, everything out of the drum. So it's very, very important from a maintenance standpoint. The fuel and the gas system is obviously what's providing the energy to roast the coffee. And as a system, obviously it would include all the components of the fuel train, the burner control, the gas safety, the gas adjustment, things like regulators, that kind of stuff. Mechanical systems on roasters are kind of everything else, including motors, fans, bearings, bushings, pulleys, all the motion transfer, all the power transfer, speed controls. Depending on the sophistication of the roaster, the mechanical systems can get very, very complicated as well. And if your roaster has an automation system, that's typically an extra system on top of everything else that would then control all the other aspects. But from a maintenance standpoint, it would be a standalone. So slide, please.
Actually, Doug, I have a question
Mhm.
about safety. Since techs are working on gas systems, can you speak to some of the safety protocols you
Yes.
have to go through?
Yes, we'll get to that one.
Okay,
Yes, 100%.
I just want to make sure.
Oh yeah, yes. So just a quick note, tech support. All manufacturers of roasters do have tech support, but they really, they tend to vary widely in the actual hands-on practical aspects of it. They're all great people. They all really try to help, but it can be a challenge. I haven't had the best luck getting documentation, drawings, things of that nature. So, I mean, just be aware that if you're out there in the world and you happen to be working on a roaster, it's not likely going to give you a significant input if you call for tech support. I have the kind of privilege of knowing most of these guys personally, and I really quite like them. But as I say, a lot of them are a little bit sort of hamstrung in terms of documentation. Electrical drawings, things of that nature can be a bit of a challenge to get a hold of. So if you do have customers that have good documentation, make sure it's handy near the roaster so that you can refer to it if necessary, especially things like electrical drawings. I would always call the manufacturer, don't hesitate, but just be aware that I know for some brewers, espresso machines, things of that nature, the manufacturers can really give you a lot of input and a lot of help, and it's not really the same with roasters for most industrial systems in general, but for roasters it's exactly the same. Okay, so slide please. So as a tech working on brewers, most things that you would come across when you're asked to help with a roaster would probably be issues that you would see as a result of something in the air system and the airflow not being taken care of properly in a roaster. The picture on the side here shows a little bit of the airflow through, this is actually a picture of a Diedrich of an IR12. The airflow through a roaster is really, really, really important. And all the airflow systems have to be kept very clean. And a huge part of owner maintenance is about keeping airflow clean. Any airflow decrease is going to affect the quality of the coffee. It's going to affect how their profiles run. It's going to affect how their coffee tastes. And it is not difficult stuff to keep clean. Removal of fans, cleaning of airflow pathways, air contact areas within the roaster. So you can see typically most roasters work in this way, in that the air is actually pulled through the system. The airflow through the roaster is typically not that strong. Cooling trays are generally a lot stronger, although in this case, the Diedrichs, the smaller Diedrichs, use the same fan for both. But the airflow through the system generally moves quite slowly. We had to test a one-bag Probat recently, and the full speed airflow through the roaster itself was only about 400 CFM. That allows lots of time for the coffee exhaust, for smoke, for dust to actually deposit on the walls of the machine, on the walls of the pipes, on the fans, on the fan housings, all the areas where the air hits the walls, hits moving parts. Tear it down, double check everything. It's amazing how often a problem with a roaster will be the result of not maintaining airflow. Slide, please. So ducting, fans, air contact areas like chaff collection areas, if it's within a machine, they should all be very thoroughly cleaned about every 100 to 150 hours of operation. And when I say a fan, if you take a fan out, take the fan right off of the arbor on the motor, like really get in there, scrapers, wire brushes, I've tried a variety of mechanical methods, wire brushes on drills, angle grinders, that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, there's really nothing that beats just getting in there with a scraper and scraping it down. It's the roaster in an ideal world. Every time you clean it, should really look physically, visually, should basically look new. You can get a variety of things out there these days. Ernex sells a couple of products for cleaning roaster now that are not bad. TSP, just old-fashioned TSP, actually works very effectively if you spray stuff down, give it a bit of a rest. You can get a food-grade TSP for cleaning. And generally speaking, I would use food-grade for everything. The idea is, as I say, get it right back to the metal, get it right back to the beginning. You increase airflow back to original state that way. You also remove all of the fuel so that when you do have a fire, it's going to significantly decrease the fire severity. Really dirty airflow pathways will give you dirty tasting coffee. It will typically kill acidity and clarity in your coffee. It'll lead to lack of development because your profiles will start to get very, very strange. Heat buildup, faster roasts. You can also get burner issues. You can get all sorts of stuff as a result of airflow. It's a very, very simple thing to clean, to get in there with a brush, to get in there with a chimney brush, and just basically it's a dirty, nasty job, and everybody's got to do it. It's like working in a kitchen and having to strip out the stove and doing all that stuff. So slide, please. The airflow, something that I think is quite important that people tend to forget, is the airflow within a pipe doesn't go down in a linear fashion. So in other words, if you have a 6-inch duct and you lose half an inch all the way around, you have half an inch of buildup. And I've got a couple of pictures on a couple of slides coming up that show you the buildup in a pipe. Within that pipe, if you lose half an inch all the way around, you've lost an inch out of your pipe, you've lost kind of 15% of the cross section, but you actually lose about 30% of your airflow. So that buildup really affects your airflow very, very quickly. There are some commercial cleaning companies out there that will do ducts. If you have one in your city, a lot of them do a good job, but more for not on the roaster itself, more for the ducts within the building. Those ducts within your building, your cold stack and your hot stack, the cooling tray stack, and the actual burner side stack, if there's two separate ones, they do need to be cleaned on a monthly basis as well. And a lot of these commercial guys do a great job of that kind of stuff. They'll have different systems. They can poke up the pipe with obviously different flails with metal tips on them, or much more aggressive brushes and stuff. And they do a good job on that kind of stuff. But the roaster itself, you just got to pull it apart and scrape it down. Have a look in the manual for the machine. Most manufacturers do detail some maintenance profiles in terms of daily, weekly, monthly again. But that buildup is incredibly flammable. It's incredibly invasive in terms of choking down your airflow, and it really needs to be cleaned. As a technician working on espresso equipment, brewers, if you get that call, the first thing that I would check, generally speaking, depending on symptoms, but the first thing that I would check would be that airflow. Just make sure, chances are, even if that's not the cause of the problem, it's still a problem, because most people just don't seem to, for whatever reason, be that diligent about it. Next slide, please. I have had some success with soaking. I've got a customer back east that actually has big horse watering troughs with heaters in them, and they actually use TSP. They buy 2 TSP in 50-gallon drums, and they'll literally take their ducks out, soak them in these tubs overnight. Can work very well, but again, just scrape it. For fans, for removal of fans, you'll need gear pullers, again, scrapers, all that sort of stuff. It really is a messy job. So if you're doing it in a roaster environment where the roaster actually is physically make sure that you're aware of what's around you, make sure that you're covering things if necessary. Be aware that obviously if you get the stuff all over you, it's probably not coming off. It's a nasty sort of filthy process, and it's just, there's no nice way to do it unless you want to build it.
Doug, can I
slide,
ask a
please.
question
Mm-hmm.
about this point here? We've been at Bellwether, we don't really have much of a problem with our hot stack and stuff like that. We could talk about why that is or not, but our cold stack does get some buildup of hydrocarbons, just like anything, like you would expect. We've been using an ultrasonic cleaner and experimenting with that. Do you know if anybody else has tried that out?
So when you say an ultrasonic, you mean soaking it in an ultrasonic bath? Yeah. Yes, I have seen other people do that, but more for mechanical components, just because I've never seen a lot of ultrasonic baths that are physically large enough to soak pieces in that are practical for a roastery to own.
Yeah.
The other one that in a similar vein is a steam cleaner.
Yep.
Okay, so I've seen them work very effectively. Dry ice blasting, I've seen on a more industrial scale, works really well. The dry ice works just like a sandblaster, but the dry ice just it sublimates, it disappears, and you're just left with all your coffee stuff. If you have an ultrasonic cleaner that's big enough, I would think that it would probably work very, very well.
Yeah, we've had pretty good success. I mean, we got one of the ones with a pretty big cabinet, such that you could fit most of the bits on your roaster in there. It takes some time, but the results are like very satisfying, I would say.
Yeah, I think if you have the ability to soak, and whether it's in a garbage can or for lowering, for example, we'll often use the chaff bucket. We've had a few spots where we'll actually mount a hose bib down the bottom of the chaff bucket. So you can fill the chaff bucket with water and TSP or water. The Ernex, it soaks with a Z, and soak it overnight, and then just use the hose bib to drain the chaff barrel. And most of the buildup, like even the buildup you can see in this picture here with the short lengths of stainless, that's how I got that out on that one. It actually soaked, and overnight I was able to just virtually peel that off with a nylon brush at the end of the day. So I mean, I think ultrasonic is great if you can. Time and soaking does a huge part of the battle as well if you can get in there. The other pipe,
sorry, Doug, I was just gonna say, like, if you just have a regular maintenance happen, you probably don't need an ultrasonic, right? Like if you're in cleaning it on a cadence that keeps it back, you're not going to need all the special equipment. You're really just going to need to brush it off regularly.
Yes. For a lot of people, what we generally recommend is do it every Friday. Do it Friday afternoon. Break it down into whether it's 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Take one section, do it Friday afternoon. In a lot of situations, even, you know what, take the pipes, soak them over the weekend. But if you do it Friday afternoon and tell everybody, you know what, I mean, obviously assuming the work is done correctly, but when you're done, you can go. Some weeks it'll be a long haul. Some weeks maybe they'll get out early. But if you do it as little bites and just do it every Friday afternoon, then it will be done regularly, and then it won't be that hard. What I generally find is people will get, you know, okay, this week we're doing the roaster cleaning, we're shutting down Friday, and then a big order will come in, or then something will happen to push that cleaning out. And once you start to push it out, it's just that much easier to push it out the next time. So 4 weeks turns into 6 weeks, turns into 7 weeks, turns into 10 weeks. I have customers now that literally don't do any cleaning, and I go once a year or twice a year, and I'm taking a hammer and a chisel to their ducts to get them clean. It's incredible. It must affect their roasting. And I think people in the industry is kind of a dirty little secret. It's not if you'll have a fire, it's when you'll have a fire. Everybody has a fire eventually if you're roasting. It's just you'll get a little piece of foreign matter in your coffee that'll, you know, start to smolder and drift through or whatever. But all of this stuff with this cleaning is really about removing that fuel as well and making sure that you're not going to have a nasty, nasty fire when you do have one.
You know, we on the fluid airbed roasters that I used to work on a lot, we had more buildup in the cooling fan than we did up, you know, up the stack. And taking that fan apart was a real pain. I always wondered if there was something that you could do on, you know, daily where, you know, think back flushing your espresso machine, I guess, for the rest of it. So was there something that I could just kind of push down, you know, through the air into that cooling fan to somehow break that up and, you know, send it down the line? And I never really came up with anything good, but it, you know, it's
I've often wondered if there's some sort of fog you can push down the pipe or something that would help with it, right? No,
yeah, that's really safe.
Yeah, all you can do is do, you know what, if you do it more often, it's fast and easy.
Yeah.
Like I say, if you break it down into a weekly job, it makes it so much easier, because then you're not dealing with stuff like what's in these pictures. You're not turning into a huge, filthy, monstrous mess. But 99 times out of 100, it's a huge, filthy, monstrous mess.
Yep.
It just, there is no way around it. There is no, it's not glamorous. It's not like so many things on cleaning espresso machine, cleaning brewers. It's really just the boring, dirty, you know, tedious stuff that solves a huge percentage of the problems.
Yeah.
At least on the airflow side.
Sure.
The other stuff gets a little more exciting, but the airflow side, it's really just about, but I mean, this pipe, as I say, this pipe on the left, that's actually laying on my back, looking up the pipe. That's facing straight up at the ceiling.
Yeah.
And these guys only called me because they had water dripping out of the pipe joints, because the condensation from the coffee at the beginning of the roasts during the dehydration phase was basically just mixing with that nastiness and dripping black funk down the pipes. It was horrible. I don't know how they roasted. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Doug, I've got a question. How can you tell as a consumer and as a service tech doing shots of espresso, we constantly get calls where my coffee qualities it sucks, you know, and can not cleaning your roaster attribute to that? And what are you looking for in the flavor of the coffee when you taste it going, you know, you might want to check your roaster?
So the first thing you'll see if you start to get a lot of airflow issues is your profiles will start to skew. The heat transfer will be different. Your roast times will be different. The actual performance of the coffee within the roaster itself will start to be different. And as it starts to be different, the development of the coffee will change. And yeah, you'll definitely taste a difference, 100%. And as I say, especially for so many people doing light roasts, you'll start to lose that clarity of flavor. You'll start to lose that brightness. You'll end up with muddier, dirtier flavors. Your roasts, generally, if you get airflow issues, your roast will start to run more quickly. You'll have too much heat. You'll scorch your coffee a little bit. So yeah, it will become noticeable for sure.
Thank you.
Doug, I do have a question. Been on a couple occasions, but not very many. Of course, I'm limited on how many machines I've seen out there. The use of static gauges or static pressure gauges throughout the vent system. Do you use that? Have you seen that so that you would get a baseline when everything's clean? Here's what our gauges in various parts of the vent should be, and you'll start to see a rise before and a drop after.
Yes.
Is that something that you would suggest?
Yeah, and that is that's a great way to monitor and to make sure that you don't have airflow issues, is to and it becomes that pressure differential that's the issue, right?
Exactly.
You'll start to see pressure build up at one point and see no pressure change in another, like, yes, 100%. And you'll see that larger companies will typically, you know, with longer ducting runs and bigger ducts and stuff like that, will have that as a maintenance indicator. When your pressure changes to X from clean, from zero effectively, then yes, it's time to clean the pipes. We don't care how many hours we've worked. And I mean, coffee is a dusty product, right? It's dirty. And depending on what you're roasting, the time of the year, the quality of the product you're buying, just in some cases, you just get bad luck and get a dirty box of green coffee, and your buildup will be significantly greater. Same on the fans. Inlet versus outlet pressure on the fans is super simple. And it's also, in some situations, I do have some customers that use that pressure and frequency drives to control their airflow. And they'll actually have fans, like the little one here, that will actually speed up and slow down as they need to maintain the airflow through the drum. Once they reach a certain point, they actually lock them out and force them to do maintenance. It's a very good way to check, 100%. And that is something that everybody could easily do. Just a pressure gauge at the bottom of the pipe and a pressure gauge at the top. If it starts to vary from what your standard setup is, you can choose what your acceptable deviation is based on sort of experience and looking at the pipes. Yeah, great idea.
One caveat to that, and I'm preaching to the choir, preaching to you, but I've ran across this more than once with customers, is that they weren't familiar with every inch of their vent system. And I would come along, they would have a vent, obvious vent issue, and that we would discover somewhere either a bird, chicken wire, bird deterrent, something in
there screen.
That you know, even chicken wire catches it and will eventually get clogged up. And these guys that put these vents in, many of them aren't dealing with coffee equipment on a regular basis, and they'll put these things in there not knowing it's going to get clogged up.
Yes, you know, my dad always used to say, would you let someone fix your car if they didn't know how to drive? I mean, very few of these trades that deal with roasters have any context whatsoever. And then you have an owner that may or may not have ever seen a roaster when they start, and may or may not have any sort of level of mechanical skills. I mean, you guys face this on a daily basis with the degree of sophistication and stuff in espresso machines and brewers now is incredible. I won't touch an espresso machine. I've had people ask, and they're incredibly sophisticated. People just won't, you know, they refuse to learn what's going on with their machine for whatever reason. So consequently, you know, as Kurt said earlier, by the time they call, they're usually so far out of kilter that, you know, they think it'll be a 20-minute fix and you're there for 3 days, right?
Just to add to your driving the car, one of the conversations that we have during these episodes is, would you let a person work on your espresso machine who doesn't drink coffee?
Yeah.
And the answers are always very interesting. So let's move on to gas and burners, my man.
Yeah. Here's where the safety stuff comes in, okay? It's really important, like really important to remember that anything that you do to a gas system should be done by a qualified ticketed gas fitter. If you touch it, you own it. So that liability will fall on you and legally could be very, very nasty if you had a fire, if you somehow unintentionally disabled part of the safety system, if you know, there are a lot of different ways that you can adjust burners that can cause very big problems. And if you are not a gas fitter, if you don't have that knowledge and that ticket, pick up the vocabulary, learn the basics so you can have an intelligent conversation with a gas fitter and call the gas fitter and guide them through what you would like it to look like at the end of the day. But do not poke around in a burner. I mean, a simple burner is one thing, but you're still going to own it. You still have all the liability as soon as you touch it. So please be aware. Don't do it unless you actually have the expertise, and don't do it unless you are willing to take on the liability. So all that said, there are two main types of burners on coffee roasters. What we would call an atmospheric burner or a power burner. The name refers to where the burner gets the oxygen from for combustion. So an atmospheric burner is like your barbecue. You literally have a jet, you shoot gas out of the jet, it gets the oxygen from the environment, you supply ignition, and you have fire. Very, very simple. Typically with an atmospheric system, you'd have a simple little pilot light setup, a little thermocouple and an ignition rod, and then the system would just draw the burner, the gas across the burner, and off you go. If you could do slide, please. atmospheric burners are by far the most common, especially on smaller roasters. The majority of the stuff that a coffee technician would see. So up to a 12 kilo, in some cases up to a half bagger, you would see atmospheric burners. Generally speaking, maintenance to them is blow them off, vacuum them off, make sure there's no buildup on them, and then if there's an issue, call the gas fitter. Power burners get the oxygen from a fan. So the idea is you have gas coming in, you have a fan pushing oxygen, you adjust that ratio physically. Typically you'll use a combustion analyzer, you'll use a couple of different things to get that adjustment done correctly. The adjustment is set then for the range of fire, and then the fan goes up and down based on where you adjust the burner. Much more efficient power burners. They have a much greater range of adjustment, typically a much better turn down ratio. Pretty rare you see them on roasters smaller than about 15 kilo. Loring uses them for everything. Some of the Italian manufacturers, Petroncini, Stampanti, guys like that, tend to use them for all their roasters for some reason, but they're much more common on larger machines. I think a power burner in an ideal world is a better burner. It's more efficient, it's more controllable, but you do have to have a much more sophisticated control setup to run them. And if you go into a roastery and there's a problem with the gas and they want you to have a look at something, even if you are competent, comfortable, willing, and you see a power burner, I would step back because they are much, much more sophisticated. They generally do require combustion analyzers to adjust correctly. And depending on the roaster, you may have to have a high temperature combustion analyzer. So it's usually a $4,000 or $5,000 piece of equipment to be able to adjust the burner correctly. Slide, please. From a maintenance standpoint, adjustments to the burner are really pretty rare. You should be, annual service should be done by a qualified gas fitter on everything, no matter how simple it is. But really, once it's set up, you shouldn't have to do much. Keep it free, as I say, of debris. If there is a filter, when you get into fan assist burners, power burners, they'll have a combustion air blower. That'll typically have a filter on it. That should be part of regular maintenance, but that's a relatively easy one. Vacuum it out, clean it out, inspect the burner for oxidation, for buildup. If there is a lot of dust in the coffee, for example, and it's falling down on top of a burner, it can actually start to cook onto the burner and create an issue with fire with that. But the actual burner itself, typically just a blow nozzle or a shop vac, just make sure that everything is clean. The nozzles can become plugged. There are a few issues with burners, but typically an annual maintenance will take care of 99% of it. And just get, as I say, find a gas fitter in the region you're working that's willing to work with you, that's willing to learn a little bit about roasters, so they have some context, and develop a relationship so that you can get a common vocabulary, a good rapport with them, and call them in when you need it. So all that said, most times if you get a call from a customer and they say that we're having a burner issue, it's going to be one of two things. It'll be a pilot light. Pilot lights will typically be 60, 70 bucks to replace. They're not usually that difficult to replace. You can watch the burner. Does it try to light? If it tries to light, you can see it sparking and it won't light. It's likely a pilot valve. The other thing that's quite common on roasters and a very common failure point with fire is pressure switch. So every roaster has what we would call proof of air. So in other words, the roaster can't fire if the exhaust fan isn't going. That exhaust fan will set a pressure switch. You can always test a pressure switch very easily by just jumpering it out. Literally just, if you imagine it as a light switch, as a pressure switch, as you'd see on an espresso machine, you just jumper it and just see if it will go past it and try and light the roaster. It's pretty much a pull it out, replace it with exactly the same piece. But as I say, really, really, really think carefully before you do anything from a safety standpoint, from a liability standpoint, from a legality standpoint. When you start touching a burner, you can get into big trouble very, very quickly if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have the ticket. So mechanical systems. A variety of mechanical systems present on roasters, obviously motors, power transfer, gearboxes, power couplings. A lot of roasters have hydraulic systems, air systems for things like actuators on doors, dampers, bearings, obviously, especially drum drive bearings are a big issue on roasters. Electrical components, little bit of a different system, but still part of sort of the mechanical setup. Most smaller roasters, again, are very simple on that electrical side, but still you'll get failure on things like contactors, on relays, really basic stuff that should be very straightforward for a brewer technician to troubleshoot and check out. The electrical drawings, if you don't have them for the roaster, you should at least be able to look at the rating plate for the roaster, and it should give you operating voltage, what you should be looking at for input voltage, all that kind of stuff. You can just have a look in the panel. Is there a transformer? Do you have a control voltage that's different based on the presence of that transformer? You should be able to do some pretty basic troubleshooting and solve most of those problems. If it is a machine where I see regular electrical issues or odd electrical issues, I will typically, even as simple as taping a piece of paper to the inside of the door, log the motor amperages when it's in use, blow everything out, all the very, very basic, simple stuff. Motors and that kind of stuff are typically easily replaceable from local sources. Just, I mean, same as a grinder. Take a picture of the rating tag, send it to your local guy, and they should be able to sort it out. American machines obviously are imperial. European machines will typically be metric. So just keep that in mind if you're doing sizing for motor arbors and stuff like that. Make sure you've got a caliper that does do metric readings as well. A lot of roasters will give you very, very strange numbers if you don't do that. All the power transfer stuff should be checked very regularly. Pulleys, belts, bearings. You should at least for the machine have a list of bearing numbers, of pulley sizes. They're really, really good items to have as spares. It's not a huge investment, but to have pulleys, to have bearings, to have belts really makes a big difference. When something goes, it'll inevitably go when they've got a roast of, a huge roast of very expensive coffee, and if you can just run over and swap a belt over and they're back and running again, it makes a huge difference. It's something that is very straightforward to solve, and it shouldn't be a big deal. Find the parts when it's easy, when there's no stress, and you'll be very, very happy. Slide, please. I generally try and only use high temperature food grade grease, lubricants, cleaners, that kind of stuff, degreasers as well. It's something on the mechanical system when you're lubricating, you will generally, for most roasters, need a spray lubricant of some type, a liquid lubricant, and a grease gun. I would also strongly recommend that when you are greasing bearings, when you're greasing any motors, anything like that, take all the old grease out first. It's really, really simple and it is super obvious. But if you don't take everything out first, all you're doing is packing old grease back in. A lot of roasters, especially with drum drive bearings, the drum drive bearing will typically sit over a hole in the front wall of the roaster, and the back side of the bearing will constantly have ground coffee moving in. If you can get that bearing out and just make sure you clean it all out very well, repack it, the bearings will last significantly longer. If you don't get it out and just keep pushing it in, you're basically forcing an abrasive paste into the bearings. And it will literally, I've seen many, many times that literally a bearing, there will be 2 or 3 actual ball bearings missing from the raceway. They just grind themselves out and kind of magically disappear somewhere. Dusty environment, dirty environment, It will mix with the grease and it will definitely lead to a problem. Gaskets, the same. When you're taking fans off, when you're taking anything off of the machine, always check the gaskets. Always use high temperature gaskets when you replace them, even if it's not necessarily a place where they would be required. I just don't see the point in not using high temperature for everything. Doors, anything in the airflow area, inspection doors as well. Just keep an eye on the gaskets. Again, that can affect the airflow. All the filters on the roaster from a mechanical side, if it has a combustion air blower that has filters, if there's any other airflow areas where you can see a filter, at the very least, blow it out from the inside and vacuum it. Again, note down the numbers and make sure that you have spares for that. Electrical cabinets can get filthy dirty. It's a cause of premature failure for all sorts of different relays, contactors, things of that nature. Just so simple. Just blow it out, vacuum it out, whatever you can get at. Obviously, lock out the machine first, but just get in there with something as simple as a little compressor or a little battery powered blow nozzle, anything like that. Just, it is so important to keep it clean, to keep that dust out of everything. Green coffee dust especially is almost like talcum powder, and it wears those electrical components really, really significantly. So anything you can do to keep it clean. I've even gone so far on some roasters for some of my customers to actually put gaskets on electrical cabinet doors if they don't have them, things like that, just to help with keeping all that stuff out. Slide, please. Thermocouples. Thermocouples are a funny one. Thermocouples are sort of a weird, magical, strange thing. Keep them clean, keep them free from buildup. If you do need to remove them to clean them, I just use a little scratchy pad or a razor knife, just very carefully scrape any buildup off of them. If you do have to pull them out to clean them, which is obviously the easiest way to clean them, make sure that you mark the insertion depth. Just even wrap a little piece of electrical tape around it, anything. But when you take the fitting off, the swage lock fitting to pull it out, it does matter very, very much that it goes back to the exact same spot. It can lead to surprisingly different numbers. Typically, a thermocouple that's approaching failure, you'll start to see sawtooth behavior. So it'll start to jump up and down, up and down, up and down. It's a very good thing to keep spares of. You need to be aware that for thermocouples, you have to use components, wires, contacts, everything that are specifically made for thermocouples and specifically made for the type of thermocouple that you're working with. J-type is red and white wires. K-type is red and yellow wires. Those are the two most common ones we see on roasters. Smaller diameter thermocouples are better in general. They will read a little bit more quickly, but it's also depending on the position and the purpose of the thermocouple. It's something to not get caught up in. A lot of roasters will push to get tiny, tiny, tiny thermocouples everywhere, and it's not necessarily an improvement. You can spend a lot of money and waste a lot of time swapping that stuff out, and it's not going to do anything. You need to make sure that thermocouple wires, as best you can, are kept away from higher voltage wires. They're really susceptible to interference from high voltage. You'll actually start to get very strange readings. You can get a lot of thermocouple noise. It can actually cause some significant issues. And especially with everybody now using, or the majority of people using Cropster or some type of data logging, you can start to see some very strange readings. Never run thermocouple wires in a conduit with any line voltage or high voltage wires. Always keep them separate. The simple way to check if you have a customer and you think they might be getting thermocouple noise is use whatever data logging software they're using. Turn the data logging software on with no motors or anything on the roaster and start to bring the motors on one at a time. And you should have a flat line for a read with nothing on. As you bring those motors on, you'll see any discrepancies, any push from the thermocouple wires in a bad spot, and it'll be fairly obvious if there's something wrong. Connectors, morettes, all that stuff, you need to use specific thermocouple stuff. If you, McMaster Carr sells all that stuff. There are a bunch of different places you can get it. But I think it is very important, especially with everybody running, as I say, Propster these days. People want to know that they're getting all the data they can possibly get, and that data is as accurate as possible. So it is something to keep an eye on. And as I say, keep them clean. You can soak them in Purocap, soak them in whatever you'd like. It works very, very well. And I think that might be the last.
That's it, my man. Thank you. Gentlemen, folks, cameras up, please. One quick thing, we're going to start with Arno. Chris Clark asked, are we going to speak on afterburners and catalytic oxidizers? And that was actually a big question from a number of viewers, Chris. That is an entirely separate episode. We felt that we had a whole ton of ground to cover here. And we wanted to do it as two separate things because I know that all of us want to learn about afterburners and catalytic oxidizers, and that will be in season 4. We'll wrestle Doug. Arno, are you online? Okay, we'll get Arno back. He had a question. Kurt, you have a question or anything you want to comment on?
Actually, Doug covered that beautifully. I kind of drawn a blank. All these questions I had ready, they were just answered. So I'm going, all right, like I've got nothing right now.
Well, that was easy. Marty, how about you?
That's easy. Thank you.
Doug, I'm sorry, you were saying?
No, dude.
Oh,
thanks. That's great. I'm glad that I covered what you were looking for.
I was going to say the same thing. I had several notes down here, and the only thing I would add is just my own personal experiences. That doesn't really add to it. It's just, you're talking about like schematics. Yeah, they're not readily available. Some of the manufacturers have gotten better in recent years, which really helps if you've got a really automated roaster that you're trying to diagnose some controls and stuff on. It's almost imperative. It definitely saves time tracing things down, but that's the exception. But like I said, they've gotten better. My personal experiences when we installed a 2-bag civets for the roastery, there were schematics, but it was a schematic for the power burner. Then there was a schematic for civets, and then there was a schematic for the blower that actually lifted the beans. And then there was a little schematic for the cooling bin blower, but nothing married them together.
Yeah.
So good luck with that.
Yes.
All right, I do have something to say now. Like you're talking about the schematics, and this is kind of more a statement I'm going to put out there for everyone out there. If you're going to do any kind of rewiring, and the schematics have all these colors that match up to say this blue wire goes over to the controller in the afterburner, and it needs to, please don't change the color, guys. Leave that a blue wire.
Yes.
I spent 3 days rewiring a Diedrich in its afterburner because the colors didn't match, and I had no idea what was going on in it. So,
hey,
yeah,
Kurt,
that one was not fun.
Kurt, I'll give you one. I followed up after an electrician installed, not a coffee guy, but it doesn't really matter on this. The color changed in the conduit. He had put a splice in the conduit, and that color of that wire changed in the conduit. We ended up pulling it out and finding a splice in it, and it changed colors in the middle of the damn conduit.
Okay. Shannon, we will answer your question. Email my email, highlandjoseph@protonmail, and we'll get you in the right direction. Arno, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Highland. Yeah. Doug, we are a very new product, just to say. Our first roaster was installed in 2018. But I did want to comment. Our roaster, we had the benefit of all the work people done before us, so we went ahead and built a drum roaster actually that has a drum that is very similar to Loring's. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
Our beans are agitated by an agitator with a fixed drum, as in a Loring.
Okay,
and
my apologies.
We also do apply conductive heat, and you can see that actually. You can see how hot the drum is and how hot your beans are, so you can kind of see that happening. But further, one of the things that we tried to address, and I just wondered if anybody else had seen this. One of the things we tried to address was the buildup in the hot path, all of the hot tubing. And we found that we got it hot enough and we insulated it really well, such that none of the goopy stuff could actually condense on the pipes. And they go straight through to, our system is catalytic in nature. They go straight through and they get combusted by the catalyst, right? So we don't have to scrape the hot stuff anymore, which is pretty cool. Our cold stack, as Kirk can attest, does require maintenance.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, you know what? If you put something as simple as putting a vent in when you're ducting a roaster, yeah, if it's not condensing on the walls, you're not going to get as much buildup. 100%. 100%. It doesn't stop it by any means, but it will give you a much longer maintenance cycle.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
We're going to do viewer questions real quick, and then we'll do one more round of questions from our panelists. Mark Rowe asked 2 questions. The first question is, fire has been mentioned multiple times. Is fire pretty common?
Yeah. It really, I won't say it's common, but it's something that everybody will experience. It is very much when you'll have a fire, mitigating the severity of the fire rather than if. The hardest thing for people to do when they have a fire is, of course, to actually think. It's really difficult. Fire is a weird thing. It just triggers that kind of reptile brain fear response in most people. For most people, the best thing to do if they have a fire is just shut off the gas and leave it alone. If you can, I quite like just to pump up like a garden sprayer, the ones that you pump up and pressurize. Water, get one with a metal tip, spray water in the dryer hole, spray it, assuming you have a chaff fire. Most fires are generally chaff fires. The airflow in the roaster will pull the water through to the chaff bucket. Don't take the coffee out of the drum. It's probably the worst thing you can do, because as soon as it hits the room, it gets to the oxygen. And now you have a fire out in the room that is being fed by the oxygen going into your cooling tray, or you shut off your cooling blower, and now all of a sudden you've got all your smoke and the flames coming into the room. I mean, I've seen fires burn wooden ceilings 16 feet above the cooling tray. Coffee roaster fires can be quite significant, but if you keep everything nice and clean, if you pay it, you can't let your attention wander when you're roasting. I go into some places and I see a big stack of magazines beside the roaster, or for whatever reason, the last 6 months, I've seen a bunch of Nintendo Switches beside roasters. How are you paying attention to your coffee, right? You're talking about a cycle that is not long enough that you really need to be playing Mario Brothers to keep yourself busy if you're doing it right. So I think pay attention, have the basics. Don't have one tiny fire extinguisher beside your roaster, please. Have a bunch of big ones. You're really better to have it and not need it.
I actually saw a couple designs I really liked where they actually plumbed a garden hose right next to the roasters. Yep. And I was like, that is probably one of the best things I've ever seen.
So simple, so effective. Just a garden hose with a spray nozzle, right?
Yep.
Perfect.
That's a good idea.
I've done a couple of fire suppression systems that were stack mounted, run off of thermocouples. They, like literally a programmable relays based system. But 99 times out of 100, water is the best thing. And the trick is just getting the water to where the fire is. And if you keep it clean, it's only going to burn as long as there's fuel in there, and then you're down to metal. So, it's pretty straightforward that way.
So a big question, and this comes from Mark Roby and also from me, is how do you, if you want to start training your techs, as you said, manufacturers don't have the best training programs or
they don't.
Systems, but if you want to start training your techs, where would you start? You want to add roasting to your training capabilities. How do you start by training your techs to roast? Where do you go?
So if do you want to teach them how to roast or how to work on
Teach them how to repair roasters.
I mean, I taught a class at the last SCA on the base repair and that kind of stuff. But there's nothing. I have taught for different companies, gone out and given sort of a hands-on class to their technicians, but it's like fixing an espresso machine. You can teach someone the basics in a couple of hours, but if it's anything beyond the basics, it's the only way to really learn is experience.
Right.
It's very, very difficult. I mean, for you guys teaching a tech, how long is it before you let them go out on their own to do a call, right?
Well, it sounds like it's like the old days where it's like, it's by breaking it apart and rebuilding it. That's how you learn.
That's
So,
OTJ. That's really all you can do.
right.
Yeah, you know what? You learn by making a lot of mistakes and, and hoping no one else
What
notices.
mistake?
But
No,
you.
we're perfect. You gotta remember.
Systemically speaking,
Some
want to learn by making a
manufacturers,
lot of mistakes where there's
some
fire.
manufacturers do
Yeah.
provide some training. I'm not going to name names here.
Mhm.
Some members of the call have hosted trainings from certain manufacturers, so it can
Mhm.
happen. I think it's really what I would say is manufacturers need to step up a bit and really provide. They need to learn a little bit from the other people who are operating in the coffee equipment space and provide better documentation and training.
Mhm. The manufacturer, when I've taught classes and stuff like that, the manufacturers have all been very open and very sharing, willing to share their knowledge and their information and their resources. It's been great. No hesitation whatsoever. But there doesn't seem to be, like for Loring, for example, okay, I'm a certified Loring tech. Loring has trained a number of people. I was their first tech outside of the plant, actually. But they've trained a number of us regionally to do their service to a level that they find acceptable. There is, when I start up a new Loring for a customer, maintenance is part of that training. But it's a very different training for an operator versus a technician. I think my nephew works with me now, and he's going to film school, and he wants a really good side hustle. And there's so few of us that do what I do that it's a great side hustle, right? But that said, teaching someone something that has taken me 30 years to pick up the knowledge is very difficult. He's got the basics, no problem. But when we go in somewhere and you see a problem, I mean, again, same for you guys. You see a problem on an espresso machine. When you go in there and you immediately know, okay, well, that's got to be over here. So let's focus on this area. And how do we, that troubleshooting is from experience more than anything else.
Now, Doug, let me ask you this. You've gone through the Loring, and there are other manufacturers that give some training. I'm assuming that as someone that they are training, they're not teaching you industry standards, safe practices. They're assuming that sort of thing. They're training you specifics on their equipment.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes, and I have to say, I mean, I'm very proudly Canadian. Our safety standards and safety on the work condition side is much more stringent in Canada than it is in the US. And the US is very, very regional. You work in different parts of the country and you have very different standards. I was asked by one customer to take gas from their next door neighbor for their roaster that was a National Guard base.
Whoa.
I mean, they literally wanted me to run a line through the woods next door to power their roaster, and nobody thought it was a big deal. Well, we pay our taxes, so that's gas is partially ours. I mean, it's in some areas in the U.S. it's like the Wild West. In some areas, it's incredibly stringent. So I find that within Canada, to your point, Marty, those standards are so different. I'm not sure how you teach them. So they're relying on us, I think, in that case, within our region in which we work to conform to those standards.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to put a pin in that and start to wrap it up. We'll go through and do closing statements. Arno, do you have anything before we wrap it up?
I just want to say thank you to Doug and thank you for the excellent knowledge and also for the message of caution And, you know, discretion is a better part of valor when you're working on a roaster. So I really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
Marty, how about you?
Well, again, I'll also, I want to thank you, Doug. You're very knowledgeable, and I too appreciated that you started out with kind of a note on the safety and the liability. It's something that you can't ignore. Of all the coffee equipment that's out there, that's probably one of the very few that could blow an entire building off its foundation. And I mean that literally. So safety is a big deal. And I think you should have your name and phone number out there for all of us to spread that. I don't know how thin you want to spread yourself, but I know there's a huge need for this type of knowledge and the ability in techs to be able to keep these things running because it's something the industry really hasn't fostered as far as the training aspect of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to reach out to Doug, you can contact me via my email, or you can contact the Coffee Technicians Guild, and we will refer the messages to him. Kurt, closing statement.
I just want to thank everyone for being here today. It was actually probably one of my favorite episodes we've done, period. Because Highland can tell you that I've been harping on him and the guild to get more roaster-based information into it. And so thank you, Doug. Thank you, Arno. Really appreciate everything that was said and done today.
And Doug.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it very much. And it's a funny part of the industry in that these machines are so vitally important to all of us, but there is so little knowledge out there. I never cease to be amazed by it. I think, I would encourage everyone to not be afraid, but to be very careful and very aware. Cultivate good trades to work with you, people who are willing to listen, not people who just tell you what you should be doing. And don't be afraid to reach out if one of us can help. It's not an easy thing. While at the same time, roasters are mechanically very, very straightforward. I think everybody benefits by knowing more about their own equipment, and knowing more about your roaster makes you a better operator. So I would encourage everyone to learn more.
So in closing, you guys, thanks for a great episode. This was also our most well-attended worldwide episode. We had people from all over the world, from all over time zones. Doug, I'm hoping we get you back for afterburners and catalytic converters for season 4. There's been a couple questions about season 4. We will be doing, we haven't solidified the dates yet, but season 4 will be after Expo, sometimes in late October and November. This group does hope to drop some pretty cool stuff between now and then. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or to the Coffee Technicians Guild on our social media. And you guys, thanks for another fantastic episode, and have a great weekend. And thanks to Richard Stiller for recording and being patient with us for going over almost a half an hour. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.